Many couples confuse attachment with love. They stay together not because they truly understand each other, but because they are afraid of being alone. Over time, silence replaces honesty, comfort replaces connection, and both people slowly lose themselves trying to keep the relationship alive. By the time they realize they were emotionally dependent instead of emotionally connected, the damage is already deep. People often ignore small emotional wounds until they become heartbreak. A lack of appreciation, repeated misunderstandings, feeling unheard. These things seem small at first. But when emotions stay unspoken for too long, resentment grows quietly. One day, someone stops trying, stops explaining, and emotionally checks out long before the relationship actually ends. Real love needs communication, respect, and self-worth, not just loyalty and attachment. There was a woman who once said, "I knew we were falling apart long before we actually ended. I just didn't want to admit it was. 'Cause losing him felt like losing a part of myself." That's the kind of pain most people never talk about. Not the dramatic ending, not the final goodbye, but the slow emotional dependence that quietly turns into survival. The moment where love stops feeling free and starts feeling like fear. A lot of couples stay together because they believe attachment is love. They think needing someone deeply means the relationship is special. But sometimes, people are not holding on to each other because they are happy. They are holding on because they are terrified of being alone. And the dangerous thing about emotional attachment is that it can look exactly like love in the beginning. The constant texting, the obsession, the inability to sleep without hearing their voice, the panic when they pull away for even a moment. People romanticize these feelings, but many times it's anxiety wearing the mask of love. At first, everything feels intense and beautiful. Two people become each other's entire world. They stop spending time with friends. They stop focusing on themselves. Their happiness becomes completely dependent on the relationship staying perfect. And slowly, without realizing it, they begin losing the very identity they had before the relationship started. One man admitted after his breakup that he didn't even recognize himself anymore. He said every decision he made revolved around keeping the relationship alive. If she was upset, his entire day collapsed. If she became distant, he panicked. He stopped asking himself what he wanted because his whole life became about not losing her. That's the part people misunderstand. Attachment makes you believe love means sacrificing yourself completely, but healthy love never asks you to disappear. The saddest relationships are often the ones where two people genuinely care about each other but are emotionally unhealthy together. One person becomes the fixer. The other becomes emotionally dependent. One keeps giving. The other keeps taking reassurance to fill wounds that existed long before the relationship began. And both people slowly become exhausted trying to carry emotional burdens they were never meant to heal for each other. Sometimes couples repeat the same mistake for years. They avoid difficult conversations because they're afraid honesty might create distance. So instead of saying, "I feel neglected," they stay silent. Instead of saying, "I'm losing myself," they pretend everything is okay. And silence has a way of turning love into loneliness. Two people can sleep in the same bed every night and still feel emotionally worlds apart. What hurts even more is how people ignore the warning signs because they're addicted to the comfort of familiarity. Humans get attached to routines, memories, shared jokes, late-night conversations, and even the pain they know. Leaving feels impossible because attachment convinces you that losing the relationship means losing your safety. So people stay. They stay in relationships where they feel unheard. They stay where affection feels forced. They stay because the idea of starting over feels more painful than settling. But emotional dependence slowly destroys self-worth. You begin measuring your value based on how someone treats you. If they become cold, you feel worthless. If they pull away, you blame yourself. You stop seeing yourself as a complete person outside of the relationship. And that's when love becomes dangerous, when your identity depends on another person choosing you. There was a moment one woman described after her breakup that stayed with people. She said the hardest part wasn't losing him. The hardest part was sitting alone and realizing she had abandoned herself long before he left. She had ignored her own needs, her own dreams, her own voice just to keep the relationship together. And in the end, despite all the sacrificing, the relationship still fell apart. That realization changes people. Because eventually, heartbreak forces you to meet yourself again. It forces you to ask painful questions. Why was I so afraid to be alone? Why did I believe losing someone meant losing my value? Why did I accept emotional crumbs and call it love? And healing begins the moment people understand this truth. Love should add to your life, not become your entire identity. Real love is not built on fear, obsession, or emotional dependency. It's built on trust, honesty, emotional security, and two people choosing each other without losing themselves in the process. The strongest relationships are not the ones where two broken people desperately cling to each other. They are the ones where two whole people stand beside each other without making the other person responsible for their self-worth. Because attachment says, I need you to survive. But healthy love says, I choose you while still being myself. And many people learn that lesson too late, after the heartbreak, after the sleepless nights, after begging someone to stay, after staring at old messages wondering where everything changed. But sometimes losing the relationship becomes the very thing that saves the person. Because eventually, you realize the most painful heartbreak is not losing someone else, it's losing yourself trying too hard to keep someone who was never meant to complete you. A man once said something after his divorce that stayed with everyone in the room. He said, "Our relationship didn't end because of one big fight. It ended because of 1,000 small moments where we stopped making each other feel loved." That's how most relationships break. Not through dramatic betrayals or explosive endings, but through small emotional wounds that get ignored for too long. In the beginning, people notice everything about each other. They listen carefully, respond quickly, ask questions, remember tiny details. Love feels alive because both people feel seen. But over time, familiarity starts replacing effort. People assume their partner already knows how much they care, so they stop expressing it. Compliments become rare. Conversations become shorter. The emotional connection that once felt natural slowly starts fading in silence. And the dangerous part is that these changes happen so slowly most couples don't even realize they're drifting apart until the distance becomes impossible to ignore. One woman described it perfectly when she talked about her relationship ending after 7 years. She said there wasn't a single moment where everything collapsed. Instead, there were tiny moments that kept piling up. The nights he barely looked up from his phone while she was talking. The times she said, "I'm fine," because she felt too exhausted to explain her feelings anymore. The birthdays that felt routine instead of meaningful. The arguments that never truly got resolved, only postponed. Little by little, disappointment replaced connection. People underestimate emotional neglect because it doesn't leave visible scars, but feeling unseen by the person you love can slowly destroy your spirit. Sometimes the deepest loneliness happens inside relationships when you're physically beside someone but emotionally abandoned. Many couples repeat the mistake of believing love can survive without communication. They think staying together is enough. They think loyalty alone will keep the relationship alive. But relationships don't die from lack of love as often as they die from lack of emotional attention. People want to feel heard. They want to feel valued. They want to feel emotionally safe enough to express pain without feeling dismissed. The problem is that many people avoid difficult conversations because they fear conflict. So instead of saying, "You've been distant lately and it's hurting me," they stay quiet. Instead of saying, "I feel emotionally alone," they convince themselves they're asking for too much. And silence becomes dangerous because unspoken pain does not disappear. It grows. Over time, resentment begins building in places where honesty should have existed. One partner starts feeling unappreciated. The other feels constantly criticized. Small misunderstandings become emotional walls. And eventually, couples stop talking to connect. They only talk to defend themselves. A man once admitted that by the final year of his relationship, he already felt single emotionally. He said they still lived together, still shared routines, still posted pictures smiling online, but deep down they had become strangers trying to preserve the memory of what they used to be. That's what heartbreak looks like long before the actual breakup happens. Sometimes relationships end emotionally months or even years before they officially end. And one of the most painful parts is how long people ignore the truth because they are attached to potential. They remember how things used to feel in the beginning, so they keep hoping those feelings will magically return on their own. But love doesn't. Survive on memories alone. Relationships need continuous care. Emotional connection is not something you build once and keep forever untouched. It requires attention, honesty, effort, and vulnerability over and over again. The saddest thing is that many people don't speak up because they fear being too emotional or too needy. So they settle for emotional crumbs while convincing themselves to be grateful for whatever affection they still receive. They lower their standards just to avoid losing the relationship. But slowly, every ignored feeling chips away at their self-worth. One woman said she realized her relationship was truly over during a simple moment at dinner. She was talking about something important that happened in her day, and halfway through the story she noticed he wasn't listening at all. He nodded occasionally, but emotionally he wasn't there. She stopped speaking mid-sentence, and he didn't even notice. She smiled to hide the pain, but inside something broke, not because of that single moment, but because she realized how many times she had felt emotionally invisible before that night. People think heartbreak begins when someone leaves, but often, heartbreak begins the moment someone starts feeling alone beside the person they love. Still, there's something important many people learn after these painful endings. They realize communication is not weakness. Expressing emotional needs is not desperation. Wanting reassurance, affection, effort, and honesty does not make someone difficult to love. Healthy relationships are built by people who are willing to have uncomfortable conversations before silence destroys everything. And sometimes losing a relationship teaches people how to finally stop abandoning themselves. They learn that constantly suppressing feelings to keep peace only creates distance. They learn that self-worth means speaking honestly even when it risks conflict. Most importantly, they learn that love cannot survive where emotional neglect becomes normal, because in the end, relationships rarely collapse in one dramatic moment. They collapse quietly through missed conversations, ignored pain, emotional distance, and all the little wounds nobody thought mattered until one day, there was no love left strong enough to carry the weight of everything left unsaid.